Welcome to the Cowboy Office Show with expert analysis and epic discussion on the Arabian Working Western Alliance. Your co-hosts are Jody Brainerd and Brian Dykert, industry veterans with over 120 years of combined judging, competing, training, and living the cowboy lifestyle. In this series, we highlight the growing popularity of the Working Western Alliance and the programs available as we aim to ask important questions that create change. Together, we will learn from the ride already ridden, explore the trail not yet taken, and help to make our industry better for us all. Each episode will ride around the Working Western industry in less time than it takes you to load the truck and trailer. Drop your email at cowboyoffice.com for first access to these episodes, exclusive industry insights, and be sure to say hi to us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Don't forget to visit ArabianWorkingWestern.com to learn more about their programs and incentives. Saddle up as we ride into today's show.
Hello, horse world. The Yellowstone effect has hit the horse show world. Living the cowboy lifestyle is gaining ground, as it's good for people and good for horses, no doubt. The working Western lifestyle leads to working Western disciplines and competition, reining, cutting, cow horses, and ranch riding. Today is the first of a four-part series as we explore the Arabian Working Western Alliance. Welcome to the Cowboy Office. I'm Brian.
And I'm Jody. Today we have the founder and executive director as well as one of the board members of the Arabian Working Western Alliance with us. First, let me welcome Sandy Worley. Sandy, good to see you again. Welcome.
Hi, Jody.
After a career as a social science researcher, having worked for the U.S. Department of Justice, she returned to her family farm in Wisconsin to raise hay and working Western Arabian horses. Her small breeding program has produced national champions in reining, ranch riding, and rein cow horse. She currently serves on the AHA U.S. National Show Commission and is the executive director of the AWWA. Sandy, we can't wait.
Kind of a little quiver here, so be gentle.
It's all good. And next, let me welcome my longtime colleague and really good friend, Leo Foray. After returning home from his service in Vietnam, Leo, thank you for your service. Leo and his wife Sharon moved from Minnesota to a large cattle and horse ranch in New Mexico, where he was responsible for all the ranch duties, including starting the 2-year-olds. And if I'm not mistaken, you're still doing that. On a working ranch, the horses that are used during the week for checking and sorting cattle are cleaned up on the weekends for horse shows. Leo has been an AQHA judge for 44 years, an NRHA judge for 38 years, also an approved judge for the Rein Cow Horse Association, and in the Working Western Division of the Arabian Horse Association. Beginning in 2010, Leo has served as an AQHA show steward, officiating both AQHA Open and Youth World shows. Leo currently serves on the board of directors for the Arabian Working Western Alliance. Leo, I can't believe that I've known you this long, but welcome. We're glad to have you.
Well, Jody, thank you for having us here today. And every time I'm with you, I think about the days when we all used to come down and ride for a couple of days with you before the Rochester Horse Show at your place down in Rochester. And it was always a good and interesting time. Thank you.
Only 40 years ago or so, thereabouts.
Hey, the good news is we're still all here.
Exactly. Every day's a good one.
Yep, we count our blessings, and every day is a good one. Most of us know about the vast versatility of the Arabian and the Half-Arabian horses, and all the things the breed has to offer, with beauty being probably on the top of that list. That's probably the most common thing that everybody thinks about when you say an Arabian horse. And maybe even more so is a common misnomer that the Arabian breed is a little schizo, a little flighty. Really a misnomer, and all of us have direct experience with riding and training Arabs. I know I did, and you guys did too. It's an interesting part of the conversation, but really is a misnomer. If you walked into the airport and asked any passerby what they knew about an Arabian horse, they'd probably say beautiful, but a little bit flighty. So the big question is, Sandy and Leo, why create the Arabian Working Western Alliance?
Go ahead, Sandy.
Because I knew this was going to be our first question. Because he's right. It is something that seems to be part of the Arabian horse culture. It's something that we have to deal with all the time. And that's probably the biggest reason, or one of the biggest reasons, that we started the Arabian Working Western Alliance, because these horses represent bloodlines that have been doing reining, cutting, cow horse ranch work on real ranches for generations. And we have particular bloodlines that are bred and known for doing these kind of things. Yet within the industry, especially back in the 1970s and the 80s, it was very lucrative to be breeding horses, the firing Arabian stallion, when he's striking, and our big trotting flat saddle horses. They really do stir a passion and bring a sense of awe and beauty. But meanwhile, the blue collar working Western Arabian horse, he's going about his thing. And we want to recognize those horses. That's the second thing that led to the development of the AWWA, is to provide recognition and open opportunities for the Arabian working Western horse.
Well, totally agree. And the thing that has impressed me about the working Western quote-unquote horse is that it goes back to what you and I grew up with, Jody. The horses that we showed and rode were the horses that were every day they had a job. And it's been a little bit of an issue, I think, and we'll get into this in the next podcast, that turning a job for a horse into a horse show class can be somewhat problematic. And so we'll talk about that, I believe, next time a little bit more. But the strength in almost any breed, certainly the quarter horse paints, Appaloosas, and the Arabians as well, has been the working type of horse, the horse that you use every day. And they weren't prima donnas. Like Jody said earlier in my introduction, that when I worked on the ranch in New Mexico, we didn't have any show horses, but we went to horse shows. And I think that would be nice to get back to that.
And were most of those Arabs on that ranch? Not New Mexico?
Not where I was, but
Okay.
It was the same kind of a situation, though. The horses were used all the time.
Right.
They had a job. They
Right.
worked. And then you'd clean them up and go to a horse show and kind of do the same thing, but you did it in a style that allowed you and your horse to work together and get a job done.
Right.
I think that's one of the things that people really love about their Arabian horse, is that they become like a member of the family. I was over at the Scottsdale show today and talking to Velvet Heiser. I don't know if you know her, but she's from Wyoming, and they have a ranch and they raise Arabian horses. And so these horses are part of what they do, but she also has them, in the show ring. They can take those horses and work them. Then they go to the show. These are great family horses. The versatility that Brian was talking about is still there. It's a different kind of level that you developed with your Arabian horse. They also have quarter horses. And she said that when they go out in the pasture, the quarter horses look up, it's her, okay. And they keep doing their thing. The Arabians look up and go, well, what's she doing out here? And they come to her and they've got their nose in your pocket. And I hear that a lot about Arabian horses. That's what makes them a great family horse.
For sure.
A little more personable.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be with you a little bit more, right?
Yeah. Well, and Leo and Jody can speak to this more, but horses are what you train them to be. And if you want the fiery Arabian stallion, if you want the big trotting saddle horse, we've got those too. But, you rode my cow horse. Talk about that.
Well, it could just as well have been a quarter horse. It was a horse that the rider and the horse, worked together for fun for both of us, hopefully, and do a job.
Well, you guys remember, I'm going to diverge just a touch, only because we're all the same age, but you guys remember when Barbara Williams won the limited open world title on Silver Tide, don't you?
Yes.
That was in the 80s, and it was pretty, the NRHA is still young, all the sport's still young. She came out and whooped.
For sure.
And anyway, so it was just pretty cool. And if you looked at Silver Tide, I mean, other than being better looking, most quarter horses are a little bit more on the common-headed side, an Arab is automatically a little bit better looking, their chiseled face and all that stuff. So, the cleanliness to the throat, the neck, the sharpness to the edges in their heads make them a more attractive kind of horse. It was a talented, and we see it. We're going to talk about a few of them in today's time. I mean, that was 30 years ago, which was not new news. So
No, but they were athletes.
Formed to function, whether they were quarter horses or Arabians, they were built to do that. And we still have those horses built to do that. We need to recognize them. And that's what AWWA is about.
So the Alliance is really focused on putting the emphasis on the working Western horse, right?
Correct.
And then doing it in various programs that we'll get into in a second. But that's really kind of your focus. And in today's industry, you see that going how? Hard, easy?
Things are just exploding. I just walking around on the Scottsdale showgrounds. Hey, have you got a 4-year-old that I could? Hey, have you got? And we just don't have enough of them for the demand right now.
That's great. It's great to hear.
I get a lot of calls because my number's on the website. I get a lot of calls from quarter horse mare owners that want to breed to the right kind of Arab stallion. So they're out there looking. They hear about these half Arabs. They want to get in on that too. And kudos to them for knowing that they want to breed to the right one.
Jody, you spent some time riding them, right?
Oh, I certainly have. I've ridden quite a few and had a great deal of success. I will just throw this story out there at you, Sandy. This is going back probably 25 years, but I was asked by Natalie Gaylord if I would ride a couple of futurity horses for her, half Arab futurity horses. And I'm, of course, Ed and I were playing golf on the golf course with a good friend, John Vance. And of course, you're not going to say no then, right? So anyway, she sends these horses to me, really super nice horses. And at that time, the futurity was in Lexington or Louisville. Where was it?
Pre-futurity.
Yeah,
pre-futurity
exactly.
Was in Louisville.
At the national championship show. Didn't they alternate every year there or something like that? I mean, back then, I believe.
You're talking
Brian,
about the Arab Nationals.
Yeah, the Arab Nationals. Yes.
Yeah, the Arab Nationals would rotate between Louisville, Kentucky, and Albuquerque, New Mexico.
So this was in Louisville, and the thing that's interesting about this story, we had the horses showed great, had a great deal of success, but the Arabian Horse Association was guilty of bias because I firsthand experienced that. And what happened is the show was so massive and there was no place to ride, right? I mean, there's no place to ride.
There's no.
So anyway, outside there were some areas and there was about 400 Arabians on lunge lines because pretty much nobody ever rode them, right?
That's how we do it.
I had to sit and wait on my 3-year-old for a spot when somebody got off the lunge line. And so somebody gets off the lunge line, I go out there and I start loping this colt in a circle. And here comes the Arabian halter horse guy out there and said, "Can I work my horse here?" And I said, "No." And I thought, I wonder what's going to happen if I have to knock an Arabian halter horse trainer down to have a place to ride. But, if you had a Western saddle on, really at that time, you weren't.
You were second fiddle.
Yeah, exactly. So this is just fantastic. And the more I rode those horses, trained some national champions, you have to experience the Arabian yourself. And the purebreds, the halves, to ride them, you have to experience that to know how good they are. But I'm so happy to see this working association come into play because people will find out about it. And I promise you it will grow.
Oh, thanks, Jody. And your story reminds me of another story. I guess that's how we do this, right?
Yeah.
But a group of some pretty well-known people in the industry, Eleanor Hamilton and Tom Redmond, Dick Ames, Joe Benton, they got together and they put that Scottsdale for charity and put some money in there, and the reining came along. When you get entries, then smaller shows go, oh, well, that reining is really popular. Let's throw a couple of reining classes in there. Well, we had the worst ground in the farthest arena, and that level of respect that you were talking about, it just wasn't there. We have reining classes, but you can go over there in that gravel pile. That partly was what caused Leo and I to bring the Working Western Celebration about in Madison, Wisconsin. It was a show that focused only on the Working Western. It was reining, cow horse. We had some roping all night long. Oh gosh, Leo and I still have flashbacks.
2013, you guys put on the celebration.
Yep.
Yeah.
Everyone thought we were crazy, but we had a lot of fun. And by the time we figured it out, then COVID hit, shut us down. So pieces of the celebration are in the AWWA. And that's when we talk about where the AWWA is going, it's back to that all breed. Let's have some fun with working Western kind of stuff. I think that's changed though, Jody. I think the Western disciplines do have the respect, and AHA has taken notice, and it's a good thing to see that the working Western horses have their place at the table now too.
Which is just the working horse, what you're doing with it. And then we got to bring it into a modernization of competition, because we're going to go to the horse show. There's not only the lifestyle of it, but then it's, let's go to the horse show and compete and see who's better today. But the industry is going through this a little bit of metamorphosis from that aspect of it, where the saddle horses had a lot of notoriety in the earlier days, and that's starting to find different ground. Is that a
For sure. No, it is. I was a superintendent for the horse shows at the Minnesota State Fairgrounds. And when that show was started years and years and years ago, and Jody will remember this living in Minnesota, the saddle seat, those kind of classes were really strong. And by the time I left there, they were getting so small. And it's a shame to lose that. I mean, the versatility of the show was really interesting. The State Fair drew a lot of people to see and get close to animals, especially for the kids that they had no other access to it. And it was hard for people to understand what kind of a horse show is this when the class only has one or two horses in it, you know?
Yeah.
And the ranch working type classes in all breeds have loomed so much that it's saved a lot of weekend type horse shows to have those classes available. And the Arabs can do it as well as anybody. And like Sandy said, we'd like to try to recognize those horses that are family horses, and that the whole family can do something with them and have a good time at the same time.
Talk about what the Alliance is and what it's doing, because you have various programs inside it, right? And so with the modernization, and the whole Yellowstone effect is about making Cowboy cool again. Talk about my age getting in the way. Well, Cowboy in the 80s was an urban cowboy. It's another cycle, different form, but another cycle. Cowboy's cool again. How do you guys see that? Talk about the programs of the Alliance, what your focus is on the working Western Arabian part of the industry, and how that fits in this whole new Cowboy's cool part.
I've never been cool, so I can't talk to that part, but I'll tell you about some of our programs. And we wanted to recognize the amateur. And I think that a lot of this growth in working Western is coming because the amateurs want to ride their horses, and they're not necessarily in it to the level of having a trainer, and some of those Western pleasure show outfits are quite pricey. So here's a level that we can take our horse and we can show, and we feel like we can do it ourselves. And so we wanted to emphasize the amateur part of that. Our first program that we came out with back in 2019 was called the Bonanza program, and it runs parallel with the U.S. national classes. So in reining and cow horse and trail and ranch riding, those type of classes, we also do a little jackpot on the side, and everybody throws in a little bit of money, and then we give awards. The exhibitors trust the AWWA to hold on to that money and then redistribute it for them. And that part has just blossomed. Everybody likes getting into that and getting a little check on the side. And we really were happy that the amateurs took to that the way they do. One thing with the Arabians being part of USEF is that when they talk about amateurs, when we say amateurs and not non-pro, is that we have classes that are amateur owner classes, and we also have classes that are amateur classes. So if Leo owns a horse, an amateur, well, I'm sorry, you're a professional, but let's pretend you're an amateur, okay? And so if he owns the horse as the amateur owner, he can go into all of the AO classes, as we call them, and then someone else can ride that same horse in the amateur class.
Right.
So it's a nice way to get your friends involved, or maybe mom rides and she's not at the same level. So that kind of thing goes on too. And we reward amateurs. You don't have to be the amateur owner to do.
And when I saw that in your program, that amateurs could ride others' horses. I thought that was phenomenal. That's one of the first big steps that I've seen our industry take at all. And I'd love to see more of it. We can have the conversation about amateurs and non-pros, but because they're all amateurs. It's what we title them. In our world, the pro, non-pro is the problem. And the pressure is amateurs want what amateurs want. And I thought that was fascinating. So do you see, is the demand growing on that?
Well, that amateur situation is a little bit of a double-edged sword because since you don't have to own the horse, the people that are trying to sell horses tell us that amateur angle is not the greatest thing because they're in it to sell horses. They don't want people sharing horses. We do have an actual newer twist to that where we have what's called the non-related co-owner. So even though you own a horse and your relatives can go in it, now you can own a horse, co-own a horse. If Jody wasn't the consummate professional that he is, we could say that Leo and Jody own a horse, and both of them can show it in an amateur owner class, as long as their family members don't start showing it and that neither of them are related to a professional trainer. So you have to be careful. You don't just jump in and start sharing horses. There's some specific rules you need to pay attention to. But yes, on one hand, when horses are expensive, this is a way that a lot of people can show at the national level and share expenses. Someone goes in the amateur owner class, someone else will go in the amateur class. But on the other hand, we don't see a lot of selling of horses because of that.
Okay, interesting. That's kind of like I said, the double-edged sword. We've fought that in NRHA forever, and it's a little bit like, Leo, you're familiar with it too, but we call a rookie a true rookie person is someone that hasn't shown a great deal, and they open it up. You don't have to own your rookie horse. And so then all of a sudden you have a professional's son or daughter that, really can ride, but they still qualify as a rookie, and they get on a very, very expensive horse, and they're the rookie of the year. And how fair is it? It's not at all. I mean, it's a circus, but try to find ways to encourage people that would like to get into the sport. And I think that's at least you're trying to find a way to make everybody happy.
Well, I think NRHA was one of the first organizations to realize that. You and I both remember, Jody, when we started this back in the days of the early NRHA, there were two classes, open and non-pro.
That was it. And it would take all day.
Yeah.
Because there'd be 50 or 75 head in each.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
But it discouraged new people from starting. Because if they're going to start, they have to be able to have a comfort level that they feel like they want to start. And so NRHA was one of the first groups to have the rookies and the limited and the different divisions. I think it helped a lot and encouraged new people, gave them a place that their comfort level was going to let them get started.
Yeah, well, to me, one of the biggest pressures in today's industry, you're right. What does everybody want in comp? Because when we leave home, and we go to the horse show, we're actually wanting to compete. And when we compete, we want to compete against our equal peers. We don't want it to be unfair. And there lies the continual pressure in our industry to keep the fairness in the proper place. Because now the amateur owner, the non-pro, in our day, it was the spouses of the trainers. Remember when we used to have the ladies reigning? Doesn't exist anymore, but everybody would scream because the wives of the pros would dominate it. It's a big piece in the industry that we are yet to figure out. I don't think it's that hard, but we can keep going with that.
Yeah. The way to get new people started into anything is give them something that's at their comfort level.
Yes.
Because there's no reason they're going to start with kind of a large dollar amount, but a National Reining Cow Horse Association, if a amateur or non-pro rider wins, I think they hit $1 million rider status, they're no longer allowed to show in the non-pro. But that's an awful lot of money to win.
Right.
But something like that might be palatable for people.
I hear you, and I think you're on a big one, because I think the prize money on the non-pro amateur side of the industry versus the pro side is part of the area when I say it's simple to fix, because that's where I think you ought to limit it. If non-pros, amateurs, are not trying to compete for the money, It's an added rose to success. That's my opinion, which means you'd want to limit that. Because if you want the money and you want to put in the homework, that opportunity has always been there. And in today's time, it's more so than it's ever been. I don't care what discipline it is. If you want the prize money, you want to win the Super Bowl, do your homework and get on the team and go be there. Can you do that in the horse world? Yes. Should we be overly awarding the non-professional side of our industry with prize money? Because that's what will begin to incentivize the other behavior, unfair competition. That's my point. And my point has always been they were never limited from access to the money. All they had to do was enter.
Sure.
And we've seen it.
Open is open. If you want to go for the big money, it doesn't matter who you are, what you do for a living, you're welcome to try.
Right. But the fact with the alliance, with you guys now using prize money as part of the incentive to breed and be active with working Western horses, right? And you are paying amateurs, right?
Yes.
They're getting prize money. And so is that working to your advantage for everybody's incentive? Or are you starting to feel some of those same pressure?
No. We're not anywhere near that size of it. Back when we were doing the celebration, it was so much fun to have all those different breeds there. People coming from different avenues, but yet they all loved reining or they all loved cow horse. You know? And in the show office, there was a whole line of Arabian exhibitors. I just happened to know that they were Arabian exhibitors, and they were chatting and talking, and they're so excited because they were going to get a check after this, and usually at breed shows, you just ride for ribbons, right? So they were going to get a check after this. And the next ladies in line, I knew that they were all from the North Central affiliate. They were all reiners, and they're like, yeah, but you guys get rose garlands. So, it's all what you're used to, right? And I just thought that was the greatest thing, that they were coming together and each one was experiencing something different and really thought that was cool.
Well, I just want to jump in here. And Brian and I actually had this chat a little while ago. And I said, when I was very, very young, which was like a bazillion years ago, I had the opportunity to go with my father, who judged some shows on the West Coast. And at that time, Leo, you'd remember that the California West Coast was night and day ahead of the Eastern U.S. when it came to the Western performance type horses. I mean, they were big, they were beautiful, they carried the bridle. That was the big thing with the reiners back then when it first started. Okay, what's better, collected or the East Coast style, and yada, yada. And those shows, I remember, was the middle class finals. It was the best youth in the country were on the West Coast. And there were 40, 50 head lined up. And they were all rolling crickets and making so much noise, which to me, having never heard that before, I couldn't believe that sound. But those horses were all big. They were beautiful. And you'd have a paint next to an Appaloosa, next to a quarter horse, they were all breeds showing. So when you talk about this, tell me a little bit about your Arabians again on this, and do you see that at some point in time an all breeds competition where your Arabians and your Half-Arabians can actually go with other breeds?
We are in those development stages and we haven't even started talking about our Ranch Challenge, which is another one of our programs. But when I was over at the Scottsdale show just a little while ago, Ben Balo is one of the judges there. And Ben's been a friend of mine for a long time, but he jumps down out of the chairs and he goes, I can't believe these things, Sandy. They could come and show next week and I'm judging the Cactus Classic. So it's so great that horsemen of that caliber recognize that, sure, yeah, these are horses that can do it. We just, through education and opening opportunities and to keep doing what we're doing, I think we're going to bring that news to it. I told a lot of people, I said, I'm going over the wall. I'm doing a podcast tonight and we're going to be talking to the stock horses. And they got it.
Gone to the other side.
Well, that's what we say whenever someone who rides a quarter horse comes to the U.S. Nationals, like, well, welcome to the dark side. So it's going both ways, right?
Well, I love hearing that too. And this question, we've covered some of this already, but I just want you to get a little more in depth to it. Now we know why. So, tell us, what is the Arabian Working Horse Alliance? Is it the same as like the ranch riding for Arabians? Is that what that is? Or, is it, what is it?
Well, The Arabian Working Western Alliance is actually a nonprofit corporation that has a mission to promote the Arabian and the Half-Arabian horse. And we do that through these competitions. We hold all breed horse shows. We put on clinics because a lot of that comes through education. Again, I have to tell you a story about one of our favorite people, Larry Caston. He was doing a reining clinic for us up in northern Wisconsin, and I'm as far north in Wisconsin as you can possibly go without falling into the lake. And Larry came up there. Now, my whole family has Arabians and always has had Arabians, but we don't show. We don't go to Arabian shows. We do 4-H and we do the saddlebred thing, and my nephew hunts off of them. We chase cows off on them. So we had a really nice little mare that actually did quite well in the reining competition. And she was at that clinic with Larry. And there's all the quarter horses. And it was actually at Dick Vernon's place. So I'm sure you know the Vernon boys too. And Larry goes, little girl on that Arab, bring that Arab out here. And I thought, oh God, this is going to set us back 20 years. And he told my niece, he goes, spin that horse for me. And she did. And Larry said, that, ladies and gentlemen, is a +1.5.
That's the way it should be done, right?
Yeah,
I could have kissed him.
Yeah, for sure.
You know? But we need to have those avenues of exchange. In the Arabian industry, there's a lot of stuff that you guys do that just was unheard of. And so there's a lot of cross-pollination, and that's a very positive thing. So the AWWA is actually the organization. I think what you're alluding to is what we call the Ranch Horse Challenge. And that's a brand new competition that we brought to the U.S. national level. And Leo can talk about this in more detail. But what we're trying to do is to reward the real deal ranch horse, to take those maneuvers and the kinds of things that were necessary to make a functional ranch horse and put it in a horse show setting. So, Leo, you talk more eloquently about this than I do. So
this is actually your champion from, I think, last year, right?
No, that was our first year.
Okay.
And if you look a little bit at the obstacles there was a log on each side of the area where he had to go through, and the rest of them were like pieces of firewood log, and the horse had to pick its way through there. And when the judges that we used that year were working background, the event, the challenge is, I'd like to see a horse. I mean, I'd like to judge it to where you think that's the horse you'd like to take home. And this, just going over the logs was one thing, but we threw these other pieces in there, and there was no set path. I just wanted the horse and the rider just to get through there functionally and safely, and to get from one side of that little maneuver to the other side where maybe they actually had to do the job. But to get there, you need to get there safely, and you need to get there with a horse. That picture that you had shows, to me, it shows a horse that's looking at what he's supposed to do, but he isn't being dictated to. And that's the kind of horse I'd like to take home. I think we all would. With all the horses we've ridden over the years, a horse that will help you, you take care of him and he'll take care of you, is what the challenge is looking for. At least that's Sandy and my thoughts on developing this class.
Yeah. So going back to Jody's question, that particular event is what we think would have a lot of mileage, would be popular if we could go back to that all breed competition format, using that event to do that, to celebrate the ranch horse.
Agreed. Having seen the Arabians and the Half-Arabians, they could easily be as competitive as any other breed in this competition. I mean, it's like, yeah, I'd love to watch it, love to judge it.
I'm writing that down, Jody. Well, and the other thing about that ranch challenge is that professionals can do it and amateurs as well. And our Half-Arabian champion this year was actually won by a non-pro. And Minion came up to me and she goes, "Can I do a rider substitution?" And of course, in the Arabians, that's fine. Yeah, we'll do that. She goes, "That looks like so much fun. I'm kicking him off of there." She did. She booted him off of there, her trainer off. She got on and she won it.
Love it. Yes,
That's
fantastic.
really cool.
Yeah, that's a great thing. And kudos to her for being courageous enough to say, you know what? This is about me. That's awesome. Yep, way good.
The modern push on the stock horse side of the world is in ranch riding, and we see it growing and expanding a lot. And isn't that in part of your alliance?
Yes, yes.
So talk about that a little. Where does ranch riding fit into that in your alliance?
Well, ranch riding is one of the classes that we have in our Bonanza program. So that can be jackpotted. The ranch challenge isn't per se ranch riding, although there are some maneuvers there. We also have some reining maneuvers in there. We throw a pen of cows in there, so they need to have, be able to push cows around a little bit. So we don't want to favor any particular discipline over another. We don't give them the pattern ahead of time. They don't get the pattern until they come to the show, which, in ranch riding, you've got the set patterns to pick from. And the same thing with trail. Trail is gone now that they want those patterns 2 weeks ahead of time and practice, practice, practice. So the ranch challenge, I think, is a nice blend of all of the working Western disciplines where you are showcasing the various aspects. Why do we have reining as a sport? Why do we have cow horse as a sport? Those came out of skills that the horse needed to have to be a good working partner for you on the ranch. So we're taking pieces of that, going back to the foundation and rewarding those horses that are good, versatile, all-around kind of horses.
I totally agree. The thing that has always been important to me in the ranch classes is the way of going of the horse. Jody referred to the ranch that I worked on. It was owned by Jimmy Randalls, who was at the time president of the National Cutting Horse Association. And when we left the barn, I didn't want to get 13,000 acres away from the ranch headquarters and find myself on the ground because the horse spooked at something, because it was a hell of a long walk back and I was worried about my saddle. So that first challenge class that we had, I helped Sandy and I designed it together, but one of the emphasis I had for it was as much long distance as you could get at a particular gait. So it allowed the judges to evaluate the way that horse moved, not just what he could do, but how he got from one place to the other. And some years ago, I helped some ladies when I was still in Minnesota that were in the hunter-jumper business, and they had some great old geldings that would take care of them. And I said, I don't know how to get a horse over a fence, but I bet I can get you from one fence to the next better than you're doing now. Well, that's the same thing to me as the ranch. Between getting from one thing they have to do to the next thing is just as important as doing the little part of the job. And so we've tried, over the few years we've done it now, tried to set up a pattern that would allow as much distance based on the arena space as possible at a particular gait. So you can evaluate, you watch the horse's ears, you watch the horse's tail. Is that horse just relaxed and doing what you ask him to do? And that's one of the things that I try to emphasize a lot when I talk to the judges that are judging that class.
Is that a struggling area? And I know we'll get into rules and some of that in the next episode on this series, but having judges get in tune to your ranch challenge that's actually bringing all the skills of a working Western horse and putting them into this challenge, that's what you're talking about. I think it's pretty cool. So is the next challenge getting officiating on the page you want them to be?
It definitely will be an issue as we go along. And the first year we did it, we had some judges that were self-thinkers, you might say, and there was a couple people that had actually ranch experience. And so they knew that part of the job is getting from point A to point B and being able to do the job. But getting there, you want it to be comfortable. You want to get there in a relaxed manner and with enough energy left to do whatever they're supposed to do when they get there. trying to emphasize that and foster that, and as Sandy talked about earlier, in the bloodlines that have proven that the horses they produce, whether it's the mare or the stud side, to me that's quite important in the end result.
That's interesting.
Very.
If I could go back a little bit,
Sure.
when we were talking about the different programs, we do have another program in the AWWA that's relatively new, and it's called the STAR program. These are for Arabian and half-Arabian horses that are not showing at AHA-approved events. I think there are quite a few Arabians that are out there, doing the weekend penning and sorting kind of thing, and we don't see them at AHA-approved events, and we want to find them and we want to recognize them. There's also, what really surprised me is how many Arabians are showing on the NRHA and the NRCHA level. Now, my half-Arab, he had to show on the NRCHA level because we just don't have enough Arabian shows that have cow horse classes. So the AHA has a program for open competition, and he could get qualified for nationals through that. It's become really tough to get our cow horses qualified. So the qualifications have actually been waived for 2 years now so that we can get these horses to nationals. But the horses, like, I think you had a couple of pictures, like Easy Slaughter, who's shown by Nathan Kent. He actually was at the futurity, and those horses are showing in Adequan type stuff and the affiliate finals and things like that. He's got over $15,000 in prize money. And then Jesse Chase, he was on a gray mare, and he put her in the Southeast Futurity. He's over in North Carolina. And we're not trying to be level 4 horses. We just want the respect and the acknowledgement that these horses can do this if they're bred for it. She happened to go national champion in Arabian reining that year. This is a purebred. Both of those horses are purebreds, but
Right on.
she hung in there. I think there were like 15 and she was 5th. So the STAR program is identifying and finding those horses that are out competing on the open, what we call open competition.
Uh-huh.
Well, great. I think that's a great idea. And I think when you talk about that, some of those, it costs a lot of money to horse show. And, we discussed that briefly when we started this thing. And it's like, if you have a nice horse and I can take it to 3 horse shows within a couple hundred miles of my house, it's a lot cheaper for me to do that than it is to go to Scottsdale. So that's what I'm going to do. And to be recognized for that, if I have some success in my own backyard, I think it's fantastic.
I think you bring up a pretty interesting subject. And I got shocked recently, just like within the last couple of weeks. I was looking at show bills for 2025. Cactus Classics coming up, Florida Reigning's going on right now, the Oklahoma Ride and Slide, they all got aged events in them. The cost before the entry fee is what I went, whoa. So we're getting up there, and I hear that a lot. So it's one of the pressures in today's industry. And I think it's a very interesting conversation because the big events, we need big events, big, prestigious, deep competition. We need those. Should there be a zillion of those? And that's where the exorbitant pricing comes from, in my opinion. Here comes what I see as the biggest demand and need in today's horse show industry is in the middle and the entry. We need more of those where costs are lower, competition is amongst your peers, and they're more readily available, and let people get experience and skills and development. Then if they want to go play at the big stuff, they can go. But that I see that across the board, and everybody in the horse show industry is trying to have the next bigger event, which is about volume.
Well, Jody touched on it. If he could go to 3 or 4 shows close to home, keep his expenses at a minimum, it's like I mentioned earlier, everybody needs a comfort zone to start, and comfort zone has to do with the classes they show in, but it also has to do with the expenses. So the more you can minimize expenses and have them be able to go a place and do some of the things they like to do is a double plus. I agree with you. I think there's too many of those big shows that outshadow the weekend show, you might say.
Yeah. Well, and so in that conversation, where does the Alliance fall into that? Because you guys are really kind of like a sanctioning entity, right? You don't, other than the nationals, you guys produce the national piece. Everything else is you're gathering it up through the year, correct?
We don't actually produce shows. What we like to do is to help the ones that are already established. What you're alluding to is the big shows don't need our help. Scottsdale doesn't need our help. The nationals, we went to the nationals because that was the place where these horses could get showcased and that kind of recognition. What we do on a more local level is to find those shows that have, ranch riding, ranch rail. We have a ranch rail pleasure class in the Arabians. And we provide extra goodies, splint boots and ribbons and those lovely rose garlands and those kind of perks that amateurs really like. I still have the first one that I won. They're nice little mementos and keepsakes of something that you accomplished. So we want to go on the local level and not take those shows over, but help them. And so what we do is give a little more incentive. We do have a Working Western celebration in Rancho Marietta. Now that show, gosh, that's a well-run show. It's a successful show, but the Working Western part of that show just didn't spark. It just didn't catch on. The show manager, and I bless her heart, she called me up and she goes, Sandy, we want to expand. We want more horses. Our Working Western just isn't igniting. Will you come do a Working Western celebration? Sure, we'll do one of those. That means you have to have all breeds. That means, we got to have classes for whoever shows up with whatever horse. And they agreed to that. Last year, they had 4 horses do trail. 4. They had 4 goes. Working Western celebration came in. We had 78 trail goes. Wow. We blew up that poor lady's schedule. She thought she could just, borrow a judge from here and then, then we'll run him over there. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? We're not done with trail yet. She's like, so it's those kind of things that we can do to help the smaller weekend shows that are already there. We don't want to produce our own. We want to, and that came out of COVID. Because when COVID shut down the Addison facility and we didn't have a place to go, we took pieces of it and went to the other shows.
So it's really offering your programs in existing shows, which then puts you guys in the database, kind of, you're collecting the data, providing some awards and stuff. And that's how they're going to end up at the Nationals for the championship, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. And I wouldn't be surprised that Rancho Marietta would blow up. It's the full circle of back in those days, those open horse shows on the West Coast, they were the dominant force.
Oh, yeah. The breed shows were minimal, but the big shows that were prestigious to be at and win were all breed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do a gold buckle show. I think that's what it's called there. And that looks like a huge show in that same facility.
Well, I would just throw in a question here to Leo. And we were just talking about this, and we're talking about the shows. We're talking about what you are doing. And, since you are unique, right? I mean, this is something that's new, right? You're unique. Is the possibility, Leo, for you to have some unique officiating ideas available? I mean, if you say, hey, you know what, we've got a better way to judge this, you think that you would be able to do that without stepping on USEF or the Arabian Horse Association or whatever? I mean, are you your little own entity? Could you say, hey, we have a class and this is the way we're going to judge this thing, and I don't care what your rule book says? Is that a possibility?
Sandy and I have talked about that. And
oh, thanks for throwing that
can
right
of worms.
Jody.
Yeah. Onward we ride.
Well, I think maybe Sandy alluded to it a little bit earlier on the breeding and so forth about form following function. And I think we're going to have to, the officiating has to reflect what we're trying to do. We're trying to take a job that horses do and turn it into a horse show class. So I'm not the first quarter horse class to have ranch in it was ranch riding. To this day, if you read the rules in the rule book, there is no penalty for ticking or hitting a log when you go over it. there is no penalty. It says specifically, there's no penalty for over or under spins if you're asked to spin. It's evaluated in the maneuver, and that allows judges to be judges. And I think that's what we all are judges for, is to evaluate what we're looking at. So I think, to answer your question, Jody, I don't know why not. I don't know why we couldn't dictate how the horse class is judged based on the objective of the class. Every quarter horse class, and you look in the rule book, the first paragraph or two of the description is the objective of the class. Well, I think our objective could be just as valuable, and determine which is the rank the horses on how good they accomplish what we're looking to accomplish. So I think you could, Jody. I don't see any problem with having a specific, maybe not quite as specific a judging procedure, but have judges that can look at a horse and evaluate him, and, like I said before, decide which one they'd like to take home and ride every day.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
Agreed.
I think you're both onto something there. Yeah, it could be a big one. And your whole alliance could be, because I thought the next emergence of an association that was discipline-based would be some sort of ranch riding association. I'm surprised that it hasn't happened yet. I know that they're flirting on the stock horse side, but it sounds to me like you guys are already a couple steps ahead of that. With a working Western alliance, yes, you're right now in the Arabian and Half-Arabian, but I think that gives you a much larger pool, because nobody in the breed world has what Arabs have with half-Arabs and full-blooded. We don't. You're either registered or you're not. You're grade. And if you're grade, you got to just find a discipline. So where I was going with all of that is, you're already a couple steps ahead. And then what could be next? And then when you talk about how do you elevate and modernize our officiating as well, keeping the expertise that you're after, because that's what you want. And you now got an industry that's produced a good number of them. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at two of them right now.
For sure.
So, yeah.
Well, we hope to get down to the basics of training and showing horses, and that's the horse and the rider working together to accomplish whatever you ask them to accomplish.
And so inside, do you guys get how expensive it is? You're operating inside USEF and AHA rules and regs, and your menu on fees is a little bit larger than we've been copying you guys for a while. Ours is now getting elaborate. Yours is already elaborate, but do you hear that a lot about the expense?
Oh, we do hear how expensive it is, but there's a lot of things going on in all the breed associations, and the AWWA is not AHA. It's not USEF. And so we don't have anything to do with setting those fees or making those regulations. And I don't sit on the National Executive Board for AHA. That's above my pay grade, and I want to keep it that way. So I don't know what they're doing to alleviate those kind of things. I do sit on the U.S. Show Commission, and let me tell you, those are some long nights with hard discussions of how we're going to make the budget, how we're going to keep things affordable, but yet put on one of the best horse shows we can for our exhibitors, because this is our pinnacle event, and we want to make this the national championship show. But gosh, everything is going up, and so we have to make some really tough decisions. But I can tell you that entry fee increase, stall increase, that was absolutely not on the table this year. We are not going to fund that national show by increasing rates to the exhibitor. We're going to find some other way to cut those costs.
Good for you. Good for you.
Yes.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see, and I hear you. This is my opinion on this one. The breeds and the disciplines are all in the same boat. And the boat is this. They're trying to serve a very wide, diverse group of membership. When you talk about a nationals or a world show or the fraternity, the derby, all of those things, the pressure is to have more stalls, more horses. I think that, well, if we can recognize that pressure, now we can begin to go solve it. And in today's time, I see the horse industry in some very key components. And a big one is I would break it between youth, amateurs, and pros. And does a U.S. National Horse Show, I'm just using you guys as an example, because when you talk about being on the U.S. Show Commission, you're talking about for their Arabian Nationals.
Correct.
Correct, which is the production of the national show. But the AHA puts on, don't you put on 4 or 5 different the sport horses has one.
Correct.
So let me just throw out a wild idea. Is it time, in order to keep fees within an approximate place, is it time to pull the youth out, pull the amateurs out, and let the pros be where the pros are? And now you could have a nationals, and yes, it's more production, because you'd be talking about doing 2 or 3 different, the AQHA used to have a separate seniors, they've combined all of those. They've come back where they started in different. I know some of that is a numbers game, but I think that there's some key components in there when you talk about trying to service the membership in equal peers, because that's part of that mission.
Yeah. Well, our youth, the Arabian youth, already have their own show, and that's held in Oklahoma City in July. So that they have that show. It's a standalone. But because of COVID, we lost one of our jewels in the crown, the Canadian Nationals, and that did not come back in the same format as before. And so there's been a lot of discussion on that executive level about the Canadian Nationals. There is a Canadian National show, but it is not the same. It's not the same show that AHA used to hold as the Canadian Nationals. So we do have a youth show in conjunction, what's now called the Midsummer Nationals. Then we have the U.S. National show, but there are no youth classes there. They're just amateur owner, and then the open classes are there. And then we have a sport horse show, which is all of the sport horses. Now, there's been talk about pulling the Working Western out of U.S. Nationals and having them be their own. AHA does hold a ranch horse championship in Colorado, but it doesn't seem to be getting the traction that we had hoped it to do. So that piece has to be looked at again. Part of, I think, what's going on there is our trainers are not as specialized as what you might be dealing with in the stock horse world. I manage the Mustang Arena, which is where most of the Working Western classes are. The trail classes are over in the pavilion. And then in the Ford Arena would be where we call our main ring classes. We have a tremendous amount of exhibitor conflict between those arenas because the trainers have a Western pleasure horse and a hunt seat amateur client, and then they've got a trail horse going and ranch ridings going on in Mustang. And so it is quite the balancing act to make sure that everybody gets to their class at the same time. And thank goodness I have a wonderful staff that has been working together now for a number of years, because I believe in the philosophy of building a team in order to run that. And the judges are very understanding. And I just have to tell them, hey, we're going to do a real long drag here, and then you can go get some coffee because we're waiting for trail to finish up. And that's the reality of the Arabian industry, is our trainers are also jacks of all trades. They've got horses that are very versatile, and they need to be versatile as well. So I don't see how that would help us to pull pieces out, because that would just mean we would have fewer entries at the Working Western. We've only got a couple hundred of these horses, and yet they go in 9 different classes. So it's a lot of activity for a relatively small number, and those horses wouldn't be able to pay for the Tulsa facility on their own. So it's better, I think, to keep them together and try and work within the boundaries that we've established for ourselves, because that represents our breed as well. You can come to the Arabian Horse Show on any given day and watch the native costume and watch the cow horses and see the beautiful halter horses, because all of that is going on any given day.
Right. I hear you.
One of the factors is somewhat out of our control, though, and that's facility costs. Everybody wants to go someplace where they know the weather isn't going to bother. And the nice facilities with a lot of stalls are, I'm sure every year they get more and more expensive. And yet people aren't going to go to where there's 2 outdoor rings, and in Arizona we don't have to worry quite as much about rain, but they want to be able, when they leave home, even if it's next door like Jody was talking about, they want to be pretty damn sure that they're going to be able to show when they get there.
Yeah. Good ground, good judges, good purses, good facility. And yes, in the industry, I see that as a very good thing, because in our lifetime, the amount of venues that have come to the market has actually done nothing but there are more venues than ever before, and they are continually upgrading. The other side of that coin is they do cost, which is different than going to your county fairgrounds that's got one arena.
It isn't like going to Walnut Grove to show, is it, Jody?
Yeah. Hey, we used to show outside in the rain, the mud, whatever, A lot of places didn't have a roof over them. So thing of the past. Yeah. And I think probably, Brian and I have had this discussion before when we talk about the Cowboy office and the state of the horse industry in general, that professional show management groups don't do this for the benefit of the sport. I mean, they do, but they want to make money. And that's, they're not doing it for fun. They've got huge amounts of expenses, and they also want it to pay, and it does. So it's the weekend shows where you get the group of your volunteers that want to benefit, and they want to encourage their people to show locally. And those are the ones that are the true backbone, I think. And we just don't have enough of them anymore. So it's kind of a catch-22.
For sure.
Yeah. So the U.S. Show Commission, we're all volunteers, as a lot of those positions are with breed associations. I think
bless you. It's like, good Lord, and you ever go like, really? I love my sport. I love my horse, right? That's it.
Why do I do this? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But when Brian was talking about breed associations, that they've gotten themselves into a catch-22. Because I see those things as 2 separate things: a breed association to promote the breed, and then show production on the other hand. And that's not what they were designed for, but that's what they count on for their income and their revenue now. And so they're asked to do something that really wasn't the intention in the beginning, and now they count on it.
I agree. It's how our industry has evolved over time. Breeds are really, their primary goal is to register the breed. And they're supposed to be looking after the integrity of the breed so that your genetics are good and all that stuff. That's what their primary goal is. It all evolved in our lifetime: horse showing, the competition of, and then the business of. And on the stock horse side of the world, we followed the USEF, that what used to be the AHSA, American Horse Show. Yeah. And the West Coast was the leader in all of that. Those open all breed large horse shows that were doing it all. They had the saddle horses and the stock horses. They had everybody that's Del Mar, just
Cow Palace.
Yeah, boy. So it's part of the evolution of the process. And I would agree with you on the breeds, because then showing and having a championship was a piece of recognizing their breeds. That's where it came from. And we all came out of the fair industry. All our counties had a fair, all our states had a fair, and the livestock was part of it. The horses were part of it. And now here we are 40 and 50 years later. Now we have venues that don't have fairs. They just produce horse shows. And so I see that as a pretty cool thing. It's just that there's more to that equation. And I think the cost is relative. In today's time, we're seeing inflationary costs. I think that economic cycle is going to do its thing, but Jody talks about it all the time. It all comes back to the money one way or the other. And what do we do? This is what I see. I see the horse show industry the horse show industry is getting older. And our weakness is we are not drawing the next generation. If we drew the next generation, the pressure to add more classes to keep the older guys active would go down. That's my 20 cents. So we should quit trying to service us as we get older. We'll figure it out. And we should put the emphasis in the next generation. And how do you get them involved in a way you go? And there's nothing but goodness with horses. So it's not bad for people. And should we? So that's the bigger piece. I hear it all the time, but nobody, and I don't care what part of the horse world you talk to, getting the next generation involved is what they all say, and nobody has the answer.
And I certainly don't have the answer, but I was thinking about this the other day because when I go to horse shows, the lead line classes are huge, and the walk trot classes are even decent size. But when they get in those middle ages, then you start to lose them. And I did some research on resiliency and how sports retain their participants. About the age of 11, 12, 13 is where most of and it doesn't matter what sport you're talking about, but that's where they start to drop out because other things come into their lives. So if they're showing horses, well, now soccer becomes more important, or pep rally, or being a cheerleader, or any of those things, and they will drop out of the horse industry. Another interesting study, though, that I read is that if these people have a taste of the horse when they're younger, they are more likely to come back to the horse when they have a job and, expendable income. When they get to the point and that they can have their horse. They've raised their kids. Gosh, I remember how much fun I used to have at that horse show when my grandpa led me around in lead line. I'm going to get myself a horse. That's probably not going to happen, till they're 40, 50 or something years old, right? So I think it's a good thing to add those other classes. I understand that it puts a pressure on, but we had a great discussion at the U.S. Show Commission meeting about adding in-hand trail. And I would have never thought that we would be at a point where we have in-hand trail. But you know what? It makes sense. There's so many people coming into the breed for the very first time. They want to show their horse just like everybody else. But this is where they can get into the breed, is with in-hand trail. So, everything is a double-edged sword, I guess, when you start debating the pros and cons of stuff and what are the unintended consequences of that. If the people that have the money are 60-year-old ladies that want to ride a horse for the first time, you betcha. I'll put a class in for you.
Yeah.
Because you're right. There is something about a horse that enhances your life. And we all got to live that lifestyle. So I don't begrudge somebody who grew up in the city and always dreamed of having a horse, and now they can. And I think that's great.
No, I agree.
I
agree.
I think that's great. So, and part of this discussion that we're having, but what about your short-term goals for the AWWA? And Leo, tell me about your long-term. I mean, say from the officiating, from the professionals ranks. I mean, talk us through a little bit of that. What direction are we going here?
We're going in a direction to make, I think, horse activities more palatable and more attractive to more people. It goes back to sort of what Sandy was talking about too. How we do that, there may be several options and we just have to figure out the most productive one. I grew up in the city, and when I was a kid, the early days of television, who were the heroes? The cowboys. They weren't sports guys or rock stars or what. And everybody my age, when I was in grade school, wanted to have a horse, and I never outgrew it, and the rest of them did. Is kind of the way it ended up. When I go back to when I managed was a horse superintendent for the Minnesota State Fair. Being at the fair, Jody, back when I was a kid, almost everybody still had an agricultural connection. Uncle had a farm, or grandma and grandpa had a farm, and you could see animals. The further it went into time, the only place that kids could see and be close to these animals was at like a state fair. And you alluded to the fair thing earlier. It was interesting when I was still managing the horse show at the Minnesota State Fair, people would come and they wanted to see two things. They wanted to see the Budweiser hitch and the minis, and they didn't realize there was a lot of stuff in between because they had no prior connection to agriculture in general, but certainly not to horses. And so how we get over that hurdle, Jody, I mean, I don't mean to evade your question, but it's still a work in progress. And we just have to try to pick the right, or at least try the solutions that we think are the most palatable and the most productive. And hopefully it'll come to us and trial and error, you might say, that what
Sure.
Sandy's tried to do with the AWWA here, and not restrict to a breed or to a discipline, but to have an outlet for whatever you might want to do with your horse. AWWA, like she just said, I'll put in a class for anybody who'll come and go to the horse show. And
Absolutely.
so, again, I think it's still a trial and error, Jody, and these type of discussions are maybe going to help us determine the best path, or realize that this path isn't what we want, but let's try over here. Bob Anthony used to tell me when I rode with him, when you're riding, do something, even if it's wrong.
And there's something. Yeah.
If it's wrong, don't do it again. Try something else, you know, and a lot of that is, I think, applicable in what we're trying here.
Yeah, sounds like it.
But Jody keeps asking about officiating, and that officiating piece is so important.
Oh, no question.
Especially when we first started with the Working Western celebration, who we invited in as a judge was critical. And the guys that we hired, and there were some women as well, but primarily they were the older horsemen. I wasn't really concerned about what card they had, whether it was NRHA, NRCHA, or maybe it was shot, but it was the reputation of that person as a horseman to recognize what they were looking at and what we were trying to get at. If I started naming them, I would forget a lot of them, but Bozo Rogers did a tremendous amount of work with us. This is what we did with shot. This is maybe where you want to be going. Leo was one of the first judges that we brought in as well. Yeah, and friendship has developed from that. When Jody's asking about that, I wish I had a better answer for you, Jody, because we know how important that's going to be.
Just remember, you're on the future list, Jody.
Yeah. Well, and I don't even need a better answer right now. This is some of the things that we do is to provoke thought. And you know what I mean? AWWA, I think this is such a great concept. It's such a great idea. And it's a great spot that perhaps you can use some opinions of some guys with a great deal of experience. Say, hey, you know what? This is a chance for us to do it a better way. And that's all I'm saying. It's not, I don't want to beat the officiating to death, although it's very important to Brian and I both. It jumps up in front of me, just like your, the stuff your amateurs you're more comfortable with, your professionals. I would even ask you for your long-term goals. And, if you're talking about professionals, do you see it, if say we want to look at the professional levels increasing, do you see yourself actually asking your Arabian horse trainers that are already in place to grow even larger? Or would you look at, say, someone like myself that had a barn full of, reining horses, basically of all breeds, and to increase my level of maybe the Arabians or the Half-Arabians? The professionals are the guys that I always say the professionals are the ones that kind of run the show. I ask that question all the time. Who's got the most stroke? Is it the owner? Is it the professional? So who is it? But from a professional standpoint, would you look at outside trainers? Other breed trainers to increase their numbers?
Well, I don't know how much we could increase their numbers, but I think the fact that we are not a organization that is AWWA is Arabian, but like you or Brian alluded to, the fact that the Arabians allow Half-Arabians. Doesn't matter what the other half is. And they've done that forever. And them recognizing the fact that let's take what we think are great qualities of our Arabs and let some other influence come in and still register them and still have a place for them to participate. I think it's more a part. Officiating is going to be definitely important. And I think Sandy hit on it, that not to knock the young judges, but they haven't had the experience at looking at enough things to where they maybe would be quite a kid that grew up on a ranch. Now that might be a different story, but there are so many judges now that learn to judge in a college program, and I have nothing against the college programs, but that doesn't expose them to the kind of people we're looking at to evaluate these horses. Again, I keep going back to the fact I like to see a horse that I'd like to take home and ride. I'm not necessarily going to look at a horse that is really pretty and I'd like to take it home because it's pretty. It'll look good in my pasture. I want to take it home and use it. And how we develop the AWWA, I think the key, I mentioned this to Sandy a while ago, the key in the name of the organization is the word alliance. It doesn't refer to anything specific. It enlightens theoretically, the whole industry. Sure. And I like that, the alliance in the name.
Yeah. Well, and it's a working Western class, so we've got the scorecard, right? We can run one big class. All the breeds are in there, and let's say the paid horses want to have a high point paint award. Great, we can do that. And we've got the jackpot money that we've been building with the Arabians with their stallion auction and things like that, and we can award the Arabians. So we can have an overall champion, and then we can divide things out into those other breeds. And that's how I see the future going with that. At the Working Western Celebration, we would have those kind of classes. We had Arabian ranch horse classes before AHA had them in their rule book. And people came and they participated. They found them to be a lot of fun, but they didn't care whether or not that was in their official show record. They wanted to come and participate that way. And that's how we started playing with this idea of having all the breeds. So the breed part, they could participate in their breed. And then we have what's called a Supreme Championship. And we do that in Rancho Marietta so that we have a Supreme Ranch Trail. We have a Supreme Ranch Rail and ranch riding. Yeah, those are a lot of fun. Those remind me of those old horse shows that you're talking about. And that might be the future of this industry as well, as these facilities become more and more expensive and the breed associations feel that crunch. I don't see why you couldn't do these shows. We did it, and
for sure.
Share the expenses across different organizations. Staking out that territory, which I understand coming out of the 50s and 60s, and everybody's trying to get their part of the market and stuff. Well, Leo's alluding to all the modernization, and now we're in a post-industrial kind of society. Sorry, there's a sociologist coming out.
Right.
But things change, and we can't operate on that same model anymore.
Bingo.
But back, in Wisconsin and Minnesota, where, the three out of four, who doesn't belong here? But there were so many horse clubs, I grew up there were 2 Arabian clubs in Duluth and 1 in Rice Lake, and that's only 90 miles to the south. And then you had the 3 in Minneapolis. That's a lot of horse clubs that all had a show. Well, we just don't have that big a base anymore. We don't have that many horses anymore. And I don't understand why you can't reach across the fence and put on a show together.
I couldn't agree more. And when you're talking about that base being gone, let me ask another question here. And I don't want to, because we're talking about all breeds together. So I'm not trying to beat the Arabian horse up with this question. The Arabian breed and the show horses in this part of the industry have been in a little constrictive mode. Numbers are down. And Brian and I had this discussion before we even came on the air. And I'd ask about the Arabians. It seemed like when I was young, maybe back in the 80s, it's like when you talked about those Arab halter horses, it was huge. Is it cyclical? Is it going the same direction? I mean, all our AQHA was down like crazy until the Yellowstone came out and, post-COVID, and everybody started breeding horses and, there weren't enough. And now all of a sudden I'm seeing a lot more horses for sale, which tells me that, what? They bred lots of them, and now the supply is greater than the demand. What do you see from the numbers wise? Like I said, it's not just Arabians I'm talking about, but I specifically want to ask that question. So Scottsdale's going on right now. What do you see for the future of Working Western if the overall breed numbers are dropping? Do you think we could have an increase in a spot where the Western horse could increase as opposed to the breed overall?
There's just so many large macro factors going into what's happening with all of the breeds right now. And I'm not so sure that I would want to return to the 1980s and the horse industry. And I'll talk from the Arabian perspective. because I worked on a large Arabian breeding farm in Minnesota, and Minnesota was one of the hot areas for Arabian breeding. And so many horses were produced to get that one special stallion that you were going to take to Scottsdale. So what happens, and I'll just use easy numbers, you got 10 babies and only one is special. What do you do with the other 9?
Mm-hmm.
And times change, and we have the social license to operate, which I know a lot of people cringe at that, but there's some good stuff coming out of that as well, because you're responsible for that life that you put on this earth. And so having fewer horses, I don't see as a bad thing, because I see the horses that we do have as being wanted and bred for something and used for something. And maybe they're not all level 4 horses, but gosh, they make good rookie horses, or I've seen quite a few of them at my county fair. And that's not a bad thing as long as they all get a job. So do I see us returning to something like in the 90s? I hope not.
What a powerful statement that was.
Well
And I hear
spoken,
you.
yes.
Yeah. Well, yes. Good for you. But I would take it one more step, because I think, and you're on it like 100%. And all we'd have to do, you're already doing it with amateurs, amateur owners and amateur riders. You're allowing them to use that same horse in different formats. If we dealt with ownership and not breeding numbers, might be the healthiest thing for all of us. I think your statement is extremely powerful. It's not about volume of horses. It's about having horses being readily available to do for more people. And there lies the magical kingdom, yes? And I think you already got it. And the issue's going to be, how do you keep the playing field fair? Because that's what you're going to get into. Should youth and amateurs be able to borrow horses? I'm using loose terms. The answer is yes. What do you have to do? Keep the entry per playing field fair, which is about riders' skill and talent based on whatever horse they're mounted. And Jody's got an interesting piece, which is on a handicapping component, because once horses are broke, we know where that horse's capability is, but now it has to match up with a rider. And that's the magical piece on keeping a competitive playing field fair. And could you do that and manage that? And does it move over time? The answer is yes. But that could be done, which is exactly what you're talking about, Sandy. So good for you.
Cool. Way good.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the conclusion of the first one in a series, the Arabian Working Western Alliance. But I got a feeling we're going to go farther than just the Arabians. So
Oh, boy.
we're just going to be taking the Arabians with us while we go. It's been a pleasure, Leo, Sandy. Thank you both very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to be able to talk about the insights of the industry, but talking about your alliance, the thing that you guys have created and what you're doing. I think it's going to be fascinating to see where you can go with it. And we'd love to help you push along the way. We'll have all the contact stuff in place, but www.arabianworkingwestern.com is their website. They're up. The contact info is there. Their programs are there. We'll put it in as well, arabianworkingwestern.com. Stick with us, because we got 3 more episodes coming this year. It's going to be a lot of fun. So until next time, enjoy the ride. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yep. Until next time, stay in the middle.
Thank you so much for riding along with us today. Visit ArabianWorkingWestern.com to learn about their incentives and programs and get in touch with leaders affecting our industry that we love so much. Of course, you can visit us at cowboyoffice.com to get free access to episodes, resources, and all the links. You can also find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, and all other major podcast platforms. Remember, share this episode with someone that may enjoy it, because the more we share our horses with others, the better our world may be.